is concerned that bowel cancer patients in England may in future have to pay for their own treatment. Beating Bowel Cancer says it fears a government fund which pays for medicines not available on the NHS might not be replaced. The charity's chief executive, Mark Flanagan, says patients are facing a lot of uncertainty.
At the end of January next year, we don't know whether the Cancer Drugs Fund will be replaced with anything, and bowel cancer patients don't know whether their treatment will be funded. So we're facing a broken promise. It's like bowel cancer patients are walking along a cliff edge, and they don't know whether the path's going to continue or whether they're going to be allowed to fall off.
That's Mark Flanagan, the charity's chief executive. The Cancer Drugs Fund is worth £200 million a year, and the aim is to make it easier for doctors to prescribe treatments, even if they haven't been approved by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE. The scheme's set to run until 2014, so after that, its future is uncertain. Thousands of cancer patients could be seriously affected. Let's go and talk to Steve Evans from Wolverhampton. Steve was diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer in 2011. He's been receiving treatment through the Cancer Drugs Fund. Steve, good evening to you.
Hello, Paul Franks. How are you?
I'm fine.
Well, may I say, Wolverhampton isn't in the top 40 places to visit.
You may say that, and
this interview's not started well, mate, has it?
You'd be right in saying that. I really appreciate you joining us.
Not a problem.
Just take us back, Steve, to 2011 and how you found out that you were ill.
This is a very dark subject for tea time. I'll try and keep it as light as possible. I became breathless, So I went to the doctors and had a blood test, and they said you're anemic, so you're losing blood, so perhaps you've got an ulcer. So I had an endoscopy procedure where they put a camera into your tummy, and unfortunately they found a tumour. That was then re-examined with something called a CT scan, and they found out the extent of the tumour, which meant that it was what's called T4, the stage of a tumour where it shares two organs. It actually migrates to another organ. And my organ, unfortunately, was my pancreas, my other organ. So I was identified as being inoperable, which meant that effectively my treatment was only palliative, because I was identified as life limited. And that's how it all started in September 2011.
And how did your family and you react to that news?
Well, you go into shock, and your family don't know what to do. I've done a number of interviews today. It just started with breakfast television, and it sort of snowballed. Do you realise part of the way through the morning I was apparently trendy on Twitter? How about that? I'm not even trendy in my own house. So I was chuffed with that. So I've gone through this in various forms several times, and I must say it is fabulous coming on your show, because it being local, it's the only opportunity I've had all day to speak without much of an accent. Because, I've tried flattening it and everything, speaking slowly, but it still comes through. So the effect, and the reason that I mention that, is that really, when you've got this terrible illness, it is all those around you that suffer. And this is a point that if people hear of the interviews I've done today, it's the same message that I've given. It is them that suffer. And how it affects you, well, I think it affects different people in different ways. But it is tremendously difficult. It is appalling, and if you have the facility to externalise it and talk about it, I think you automatically think that is the best option. Well, in the last few months, I've come to think of a third way, and it's left me a little bit uncomfortable insofar as I automatically thought that if you have the facility to share your illness and to externalise it, well, that's the thing to do. Well, I think there are people very stronger than me, who make the decision to, even though they could share it, to keep it all in, not to cause all those around you pain and suffering. Because I don't know you, but I can almost guarantee you know someone close or know someone who's had cancer. And just imagine how you felt. Remember how you felt. Well, I've got a lot of friends. I'm blessed to have so many friends. And I use the word blessed a lot. We're very lucky with our circumstances. But the pain that it causes those around you really is the thing that hurts you, It's an illogical guilt, but it does hurt you. So what happened when we were told? You go into shock. And then the journey continues because you're then told that you're not going to get better. So you then have a period of not knowing, but then, and this is the story I've recounted many times now, you meet your lead consultant, and in our case, everything changed. Because we met our consultant, a Professor Ferry, and it's a gag I've used many times, but the first time I heard his name, I really hoped his first name was Brian. And it was David. I was gutted. But we got friends saying we needed a second opinion, you know. So we Googled him. And he is one of the world's leading authorities, is Professor David Ferry, on keeping people with terminal stomach cancer alive. Mm. And the first thing my wife honestly said was, what's he doing in Wolverhampton? You know, what's someone with that skill doing in Wolverhampton? Well, I'm really pleased he's in Wolverhampton because together with my wife, the two of them have kept me alive because we get the very best of treatment. He said 12 months, and the story then speeds up very quickly. We had an initial national health-funded period of chemotherapy, although it was under a trial called Real 3, but that isn't the reason for this interview. We got through that with a lot of medical difficulty, but the professor kept faith, so did I, and the tumour shrunk. And it shrunk massively. But the way a tumour works, and this is a non-medical explanation, if you were to cut through a tumour, because mine's simply the wall of my stomach has now become cancerous, so there's no growths, no fibrous lumps, no volcanoes or things with hairs, and it's not horrible. It just looks like someone's painted an area of my stomach wall grey. But if you were to cut through it now, it isn't like butter. Not all of the cells are the same. It's like fruitcake. That's the analogy that's used. So when it shrunk the first time, which was a fabulous success, shall we say, just picking as an example, that chemotherapy killed all of the raisins and sultanas. Well, all that's happened now, many months after, the tumour's grown back in a slightly different configuration. But have a guess what the tumour is now missing? Raisins and sultanas. So the first chemotherapy would now be of no use.
Yeah.
So we have to look at a second line, a second level of approach. And my professor literally does strive to keep me alive.
Steve Evans from Wolverhampton. Steve, can you stay with us while
yes,
we'll do the travel, we'll do the news headlines, and we'll come back for a final word, because this Cancer Drug Fund is clearly a key to thousands of people.
At the moment, I'll be back with more during the news at 6 o'clock. John Platt, BBC WM Sport.
BBC WM 95.6.
You can now get up-to-the-minute news and sport and see the stories we're working on with BBC Local Live at bbc.co.uk/Birmingham.
Coming up to 20 to 6, Charlene Spiteri will be joining us shortly, and Peter With on the show after 6. They're next door having a chinwag at the moment. We are talking to Steve Evans at the moment from Wolverhampton, who was diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer in 2011. But he's still here, he's still fighting, and he retains an incredible sense of humour and positivity. There's a text here that says, "Francie, what an incredible man Steve Evans sounds. I wish him well," says Nick, the Sheffield commuter. He is a credit. Thousands of people make use of the Cancer Drugs Fund, which is worth $200 million a year, and the money's there until 2014, but after that the future is uncertain. And Steve, you've been a beneficiary, if you like, of the Cancer Drug Fund, haven't you?
Yes, I am Steve, who is now the warm-up act for Charlene Spiteri. So
you are.
That's quite good, isn't it? The break brings us into the current part of our journey perfectly, Paul, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I am now on Taxotere. Taxotere is a common chemotherapy drug, but it's typically used for breast cancer and cervical cancer. But the professor found that people have been having some success using it as a second-line treatment to keep people like with my condition around a little bit longer. And that's what this conversation is about. I won't get upset because I'm just using the words. I'm not putting any emotion into them. When I found my tumour had come back, the timelines that the professor was talking about were no longer 12 months. They were 3 to 6 months. And that was shocking, and I cried for half an hour when he told me. But what the taxotere will do, which is CDF funded, it gives me hope now, because I've got chemotherapy inside me. My tumour is no longer behaving. Now, it may not shrink, but it's not going to do anything at the moment. My bloods have readjusted, which is an effect that the tumour has. It affects your blood and makes me breathless and has a fatigue, and I have to be transfused to deal with that. So that's where we are. And I think the question that people are asking is, what would happen if the CDF wasn't there? Well, yeah. I've never given any thought to someone saying to me, do you know, if there was more money, we could keep you alive longer. And the question I was asked on breakfast this morning was, what would happen if that was the case? And I simply thought about it and said, I'd be very scared, you know, because I haven't had to confront that. So I don't know about the politics of it, and I don't know about the people speak with agendas. I don't have one. But all I have is the honest opinion, is that while the only consideration is a medical option and me being able to take advantage of it, I feel very comfortable and I feel supported. But I think that if I went into an environment where someone says, do you know, if you were wealthy, we could probably give you another 4 months of life, I think you'd probably feel a bit disappointed, wouldn't you? You know, it's some people I've heard say that they've contributed to the National Health Service for years and years, and it's their right. I don't have those words, Paul. That's not how my mind sits. I worked for the local authority, Wolverhampton, very proudly for 32 years, and I understand funding, and I understand service provision and limited funds, and people make decisions that are not easy to make. But one thing I would offer is that you always have to remember, and this isn't a considered opinion, I have no inside knowledge, but think of this, and all of your listeners can think of this. Every family in this country has been touched by cancer, including every sitting MP. So I'm not saying that cancer funding is safe. What I'm saying is to openly be seen to be, shall we say, structuring it in such a way where it isn't, as it isn't currently in place, where people like me can get access to CDF. That would be a big step. That would be a big step, but it's all I've got to offer, really.
Steve Evans with us. I've got to say, Steve, I've been doing this show, working on this radio station for about 34 years.
Yes, and I've been listening to it for years, frankly. Listening to it for years on your football phone. Yeah,
well, I really appreciate that, but what I was going to say was that you are one of the most incredible people that I have ever spoken to.
I don't see it, you know. I literally am just a bloke who worked for the council, who had some lovely hobbies. You know, I'm a magician and those sort of things, and I event manage, and I do all these things that I really love. And then I was told I was poorly, and I found out that I'd got all this love in my life, and life's different now, but it just perhaps won't be as long. But life's different. I mean, you know, I use the term blessed, and I use the term lucky. I could be in such a dark place. And there are many people with my condition who are so unfortunate. Because the council retired me on ill health grounds, I've got the pension of a 65-year-old person. So I don't have those money worries that people could have. I mean, how lucky is that? And I have all of this support around me and all of these lovely people who sort of are on the journey with me. I mean, I just couldn't do it without everyone else, Paul. It just wouldn't work. So, you know, I consider myself to be lucky.
Steve Evans with us. Steve, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate your time.
Never a problem, my friend.
That's Steve Evans. There's a statement from the Department of Health which says we're going to make sure there are arrangements in place from 2014 to protect individual patients receiving treatment with drugs funded by the CDF, the Cancer Drugs Fund. For the longer term, we're considering ways in which patients can continue to benefit from drugs provided through the fund. We're taking action through our cancer strategy to save an extra 5,000 lives a year by 2014 by supporting early diagnosis and improving access to high-quality tests and treatment.
BBC WM 95.6.
Travel.